Hello everybody, this is Lorena from Synergy Behavior Solutions. I'm pretty sure I'm okay. Nice. We'll see what happens, but it's a less hot day, so at least my phone won't overheat. Speaking of, a little bit cloudy, a little bit sleepy today, not gonna lie. I'm out here in my yard with a little container of kibble and Summer Dog here, just chilling. That's the spot that he chose to be in. I was hoping maybe he'd let me play with him while I was talking, but he wants to earn some of his lunch, which is totally fine. So, today I wanted to talk a little bit about, partly a shameless plug for a webinar I'm doing on Sunday, but I think I might actually be having some connection issues. I'm gonna move up closer to my house. Let's see here. Better? Worse? How's that? I think it's alright. Summer, you want to come back over here? Okay, we're gonna try this again. So, sitting up against my house, maybe better connection for Wi-Fi. So, come here, lay down. There you go, bud. So, adolescent dogs. So, for those of you who are not aware of who I am and my background is actually kids, teens, and young adults, both in institutional treatment, whether that's residential or in the foster care system or the public school system, and also in wilderness therapy. So my experience is with a lot of underdeveloped brains. I don't really like to think that our brains are ever fully developed. We're always learning throughout our lifetimes, but there is an element of brain growth that happens dramatically during adolescence. So if you ever met a teenage human, you know that they do not necessarily think or act or make choices the way that an adult human does. And the same is true for dogs. So in humans and in dogs, the adolescent brain is the time between, I would say teenagehood into young adulthood is the time when your brain grows faster than any other time in your life, except for the ages of infancy to 2 years old. So lots and lots of brain growth, lots of new neural connections, but with all of that really rapid brain growth and learning that's happening, there's this thing that happens that's kind of like some overload and some misfirings, let's say. So when we think about how that affects our adolescent dogs, we have to think about what sort of management and training can we expect to need to employ during this time in our dogs' lives? So a few things that I want to talk about before I kind of get to the helpful tips is for a couple of years I taught puppy classes, and I was always kind of surprised by how many people would show up to my class with their 4-month-old puppy, and many of them thought that their training was already finished. So they thought that their baby dog at 4 months old, because it mostly stuck around them and came when called and they taught it how to sit, was probably done but needed a little bit of extra push. And these were the folks that I wanted to talk to about adolescence in particular, because they were in for a bit of a rude awakening. So puppies and small humans, toddler humans, really like to be near their people. And so it's pretty easy when we have puppies. The challenging stuff is like potty training and the constant attention that they need, but they often want to be near us and they want to engage and interact with us. Adolescence for dogs starts at about 6 months. For some dogs, it's closer to like 8 months. But around that time, you will start to notice that your dog finds the environment way more interesting than just about anything, including you. So this is the time when our dogs start to figure out that they have some autonomy and that stuff in the environment is really, really exciting for them. So I'm not going to get into a really long, drawn-out discussion about whether or not you should spay or neuter your dog. That is a separate conversation. But if you have spayed or neutered your dog before they turned a year old, their hormones still affect them during adolescence. This is still happening. There's an influx of testosterone, aldosterone, estrogen. All of these things are happening, even if you have altered your dog. So these things still apply. You can't avoid adolescence by spaying or neutering your dog. That said, there are some special considerations if you have an intact dog, which we will be talking about in the webinar. But for right now, I'm just going to talk overall, and these things apply to any dog, whether they're spayed or neutered during adolescence or before or whatever. So, that said, once your dog realizes that the environment is fascinating, you're going to see a decline in a lot of the behaviors that you thought you had already trained. And I think, hi Sylvia, and I think it's really important to remember that dogs are not full grown until they are between 2 and sometimes 3 years of age, depending on breed and size, etc. And so, the first 3 years of your dog's life, you are still working with a puppy. So when your dog is in adolescence, you're going to see a decline in your dog's ability to respond to cues that maybe they responded to pretty consistently before. You're going to have a dog that is a lot more excitable, easier to become over-aroused, easier to have what I would call a full stress bucket. So the dog is experiences a few triggers, a little bit of trigger stacking and excitement or stress in the environment, and then is already overflowing. And so this happens because hormones are challenging and the brain isn't working maybe as linearly or fluidly as it even did when the dog was 4.5, 5 months of age. So you're dealing now with a puppy that is big, potentially, and unwieldy, and not super comfortable or aware of its body. You're dealing with what could be sometimes called like a second fear period. Sometimes our adolescent dogs will develop fears or reactions towards things that before they had no problem with. So maybe you live in the city and there's a particular bus stop with like a covered area that you pass every single day when you take your dog out to potty, and your puppy's never had a problem with it, and then at about 8 months of age, you step outside and your dog is like, that's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And now we have to work through the scary bus stop. My dog still occasionally has random fear periods of things that are new. And on that note, thinking about newness, we have to think about what sort of socialization did your puppy experience before 5 months, and how did they interact with novelty, and how did you mitigate and navigate that experience for them? Novelty is something your dog will be exposed to throughout their entire lives. So how, in their adolescence, can we start to work toward our dog being okay with novelty, even if they develop weird, random, inconsistent fears during that period? And the way that we do that is by having our dogs earn the majority of their food through training and making positive pairings with novelty in the environment. So you've probably noticed with your adolescent dog that your dog is full of a huge amount of energy they didn't have before. They're not sleeping as much as they did. Puppies sleep like all day, adolescent dogs not so much. You might feel like, or people might tell you, that your dog is testing the boundaries or trying to rebel or whatever. That's not really a thing. It's also not really a thing with teenagers, with teenage humans. That's just a way that we like to categorize or label their behavior. What we're really looking at is explorations into the environment and figuring out and learning about themselves and for themselves what they find reinforcing. And so what's cool about that is that because we have this incredibly exploding growth of brain and neural connections, we have some really amazing opportunities to build relationship and to determine for our dogs what is reinforcing for them. And as we start to learn about our dogs, because our puppies are puppies, we don't know their personality really yet. Adolescence is when that really starts to come out. We get to start seeing a lot of new behaviors, for better and for worse, and we get to start figuring out, what does my dog love? What does my dog find reinforcing, and how can I use that to my advantage to train the behaviors that I would like to see long term? Your dog will be an adult for the vast majority of their lives, so whatever they practice during puppyhood and during adolescence is what you're going to see more of down the road. So a lot of folks will find that their dog seems to forget all of their training during this time. So if you have an adolescent dog, adolescence is a great time to go back to square one. You might see a lot of resurgence in behaviors that you thought you had already moved through, like even house training struggles. You might see some inappropriate play with you. Your dog might be mouthing more, usually an expression of over-arousal, even after they've finished teething, although sometimes that can take well into adolescence to finish teething. You might see behaviors where your dog is lunging and barking at things that they didn't before. Adolescence is a lot of the time where we start to see behaviors that come out that are often due to a lack of training and socialization when the dog was a puppy. So as a trainer, hi Kristen, as a trainer, that's most of the time when I start to see dogs, is around the age of a year, when the behaviors that used to be cute are not so cute anymore. And now you're wondering why your dog didn't just grow out of that particular behavior, and that's because dogs don't really grow out of behaviors. There are a couple that would be an exception, and I would say for the most part, though, during adolescence, you have a really it's a really strong time to be able to pick up on those things and to work with them right when they show up, rather than to let them get more serious and more challenging. So my first and biggest tip for adolescent dogs is to ditch the food bowl, because your dog has more brain and physical energy than you could ever know what to do with. You are not going to be able to give an adolescent dog enough exercise, and it's not going to be healthy for them to be getting a ton of exercise because they're not fully developed yet anyway. So instead of focusing on physical exercise, which I think I see a lot of in my city, where I see a lot of adolescent dogs at the dog park for extended periods of time, finding all of their reinforcement in the environment from other dogs, interacting inappropriately with other dogs and practicing that behavior repeatedly, or endlessly chasing a ball, which is not super good for their bodies. So you can get really creative really easily just by having your dog earn their daily food ration, and having a lot of brain games and activities that you can randomly launch into to get your dog working for short bursts throughout the day, rather than having your dog go to the dog park for 2 hours and then pass out. Not only is that going to break down your relationship with your dog, but also break down your dog's body in not a great way. Maybe think about, maybe we'll do 1 or 2 trips to places where my dog can socialize with other dogs if that's something that they enjoy. And then the rest of the week we're going to work on things like recall, loose leash walking, being able to settle in distracting environments. These are the things that people actually want their adult dogs to be good at. I live in Portland, Oregon. It is a very dog-friendly city. There are dogs everywhere, and there are a lot of restaurants, cafes, stores that allow dogs in there. And most of the people that I know who have dogs expect their dog to be able to do things with them, like hiking on trails around people, kids, bikes, other dogs. They expect their dog to then be able to go to the brewery and hang out on the patio and sleep while the world walks by. They expect their dog to be able to walk to the walk-up coffee window and then loose leash walk back while they hold 2 coffees. These are the skills and the real-life daily examples of things that you want to be working on during adolescence. Puppyhood is a time to build a relationship with your dog. It's a time to work on the basic skills like house training and getting used to the crate and being alone, etc. Adolescence is really the time that's like super, super fun. You get to dig into play, you get to start exploring the world in a way maybe you couldn't before because your puppy was too small, still working on overcoming fears, things like that. But adolescence can be a really exciting time if you're prepared for it. And I think that's the piece that a lot of folks miss, is that they expect their puppy to sort of raise themselves, and then adolescence comes and they have a puppy that has raised themselves. And now their dog is really good at being self-employed, really good at finding reinforcement elsewhere in the environment other than them, and then there's frustration there. So instead of being a reactive dog owner, instead of reacting to your dog's challenging behaviors, think about being proactive. And what does that mean for you? How can you set up the environment to manage your dog to get the behaviors that you like to see in the easiest possible way? And one of the things that I tell my adolescent folks, hi Jenna, love this topic, right on target for what we want and need to learn. Totally, yeah. And to be honest, I think this is good. This is obviously good advice for any age of dog, but I think that adolescence is a time that it's a very tender time, because a lot of folks seem to think that their dogs are now grown and they should be behaving better, or that they know better. These are all the phrases that I hear when I'm working with adolescent dogs, and it really does a disservice to the dog and their capabilities of learning during that time. You have so much potential there that you can tap into, but that's where positive reinforcement training really, really comes in handy, because it's all about relationship and about finding what your dog does find reinforcing so you can use it in your training. Adolescent dogs make us better trainers. The one thing that I do not suggest you do right now with your adolescent dog, biggest tip, please don't let them off leash. Like, just don't. Unless it's a fully fenced area and you're working on recall and working with your dog, your adolescent dog is going to find way more exciting things than you in the environment, and every single time they practice ignoring your recall, your relationship degrades. And so most people let their dogs off leash far too early with far too little proofing of behaviors like recall and proximity. So now is a time to be reining it back in a way that doesn't feel restrictive to your dog, but gives them enough freedom that they can still be successful in the ways that you want them to be successful. So that said, it's like $25 to sign up for my webinar on Sunday. I'm going to be talking all about adolescent dogs. I'll touch a little bit on hormonal stuff like spaying, neutering. This is not a debate about whether or not you should spay, neuter your dog early, but I am happy to answer some of those questions. But mostly we're going to be talking about how can you make this a really exciting and fun and bonding time with your dog, and not a time that that leads to frustration and difficulty and your house getting destroyed and maybe having to contact a trainer because you didn't really know how to set your dog up for success and yourself up for success. I will say that adolescence is like the most common time that people will surrender their dogs to shelters, and it's primarily because of behavior issues. So that's really just something that is fairly easy to work through with a little bit of guidance and coaching. So join us on Sunday to get some ideas and to talk about adolescent dogs and the nightmare that is adolescence, which is what a lot of people will say that it is. I find adolescent dogs super fun because they're usually pretty naturally optimistic and they're stoked to play. They're all about play. So if we can turn our training into play, then we have a dog who's 100% bought in. Hope to see you on Sunday. Either way, feel free to drop your comments about your adolescent dog, your questions about your adolescent dog into the comments below, and I'd be happy to engage with you on them. Also, if you want to post a picture of your adolescent dog, we love to see doggy photos. Have a great day. Summer Dog says bye-bye. Bye, bud. And